Welcome to The Missing Link, a podcast where crypto and insurance come together. I'm Dan Roberts, and my co-host is Danielle Wall-Elliott. Whether you're in crypto, traditional finance, or in need of a new podcast, The Missing Link will help you explore the vital role that insurance plays in crypto and how blockchain will disrupt insurance. Join us on our journey to find the missing link. Hi everyone, we have made it to the final guest of the year. It's exciting to get to share 12 episodes with thought leaders in the space. We had Stephen Becker of UDHC and the Maker Foundation, Kane Warwick of Synthetics, Martin Karika of Mountain Protocol, to name just a few. We can't wait to bring you more content from the top voices in the space next year. To wrap this year, however, today's episode is with Erik Voorhees, a man who needs no introduction, but Danielle just couldn't help herself. We reflected on 2023 and the bad actors hopefully left behind. And we start to look on the promises of 2024, AI, Nobel Prizes, and what's on the short and long-term horizon for the space. We're grateful to Erik for his time. We really enjoyed the conversation and hope you do too. Happy holidays, everyone. Get ready for 2024. It's going to be a big one.
Bitcoin OG, pioneer entrepreneur, crypto anarchist and philosopher, lover of liberty, SBF slayer. Forbes has called him Bitcoin's last gunslinger. Today on The Missing Link, we have Erik Voorhees. Erik's crypto resume is as long as it is impressive, so bear with me. In 2011, he discovered Bitcoin from a Facebook post. In 2012, Erik became the third employee at Charlie Shrem's BitInstant as head of marketing when Bitcoin was just around $5. He's the co-founder of Coinapult, a liquidity and secure wallet service. He ran the world's largest Bitcoin app casino game, Satoshi Dice, that was half of all the Bitcoin transactions up until 2013. And he sold the game for 126,000 Bitcoin. Just months after the Mt. Gox hack in 2014, Erik launched the first non-custodial crypto exchange. Think of it like a vending machine. You put one crypto in and you get another out. As founder and CEO of Shapeshift, he led that to a successful exit for shareholders while also turning Shapeshift into a decentralized autonomous organization governed by its Fox holders. He has been featured in the book Digital Gold, the documentary Banking on Bitcoin. He's publicly debated Peter Schiff and Sam Bankman-Fried and has been interviewed by pretty much every crypto podcast and publication out there. If it sounds like I'm a fangirl of Erik's, it's because I am. I worked with Erik at Shapeshift for 6 years, and I even met my husband there, so I credit Erik for that too. I've always respected his vision for the future, his faithfulness to the fundamentals of Austrian economics, and his unwavering commitment that we as men and women are not meant to be slaves or serfs to our governments, just blindly handing over our hard-earned dollars. We're meant to control our own destiny and have financial freedom. I'm so happy we're going to reflect on this year together and hear some predictions for what's next. Welcome, Erik. Thanks for being on The Missing Link.
That was a great introduction. Thank you very much, Danielle. Glad to be here.
I listened to quite a few of your interviews to piece that together, so I hope I got it all accurately right.
Yeah, I think you got it.
Happy to introduce you on any future conferences, any speaking circuits that you need.
Yeah, I'll loop you in to do the intro. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, Erik, it's great to have you on. Thanks so much. I don't have as wild an intro for you, but yeah, Danielle certainly did you justice. We do a very quick sort of fire rapid round of different questions. So I thought I'd fire a few your way to allow our viewers to get a deeper sense on the sorts of topics that we work on. So rate yourself 1 to 10 on your crypto knowledge.
Well, let's see. Knowledge of the industry, like an 8 or a 9. Knowledge of like cryptography and like the mathematics underpinning this stuff, like a 2. Knowledge of why it's important, a 10.
There we go.
Nice. And then how about 1 to 10 on the insurance side of things?
I remember like back in the early days of the forums, lots of detractors of Bitcoin said like it will never take off because people prefer a bank account which is FDIC insured. And this concept of like, well, traditional finance is insured and crypto finance is not, has been something that critics like to point out. Of course, there's no reason that insurance can't work in the crypto world, right? Like that just has to build organically. And because the foundations of this are based on cryptography, like actual knowable facts, there should be much more room actually for efficient insurance to be done on top of blockchains. So yeah, certainly needs to become more preeminent within the industry, and I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, there's been some wild examples recently of why some of the transparency that this technology brings is going to be needed in the insurance space. So good to hear. If you were Satoshi, what secret message would you have embedded in the first block?
I feel like there's no better message than what he actually put in there. The headline from the Times, "Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks." It was so perfect, so perfect. I love that one, and I couldn't think of anything better. So if I was Satoshi, that's precisely what I would put in there.
Nice. Sounds like jury's still out if that's the same message. And as per the introduction, it's you're a crypto role model. Who are your role models in the industry, outside, dead or alive?
Let's see. I think within the industry, someone who I've always been very impressed with is Vitalik. So I've known him since 2012, years before he started Ethereum. He was like 17 years old then or something. And he's gone from obscurity to, one of the most prolific technologists in the world. And he's probably a billionaire at this point. It's possible he doesn't even know if he's a billionaire. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he has no idea if he's a billionaire because he just doesn't care. But it's rare for someone to go that quickly through changes in their life and environment to that degree and still be the same person. Vitalik's very much the same person. He's older, wiser, better, but he has not been corrupted. He cares about principles. He's a very thoughtful person, very little ego. And so I've been impressed. And, it's best if a crypto protocol has no leader. That's always best. But to a degree that it has a leader, like in Ethereum still to some degree has a leader. I don't think you could ask for a better person than Vitalik. I'd say outside of the industry, I have to fanboy over Elon Musk. I think he is like one of the greatest treasures to humanity now or in all history. And it's tragic that there's only one person like him that exists today. So I certainly don't agree with everything he says or does, but I think he is an incredible example of like a heroic man, an industrialist, and I wish there were 100 of him instead of just one.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, two good people, hard to beat. What is the most worrying trend in crypto in your eyes?
A worrying trend is the degree to which people who get involved and interested remain at like a very superficial level of understanding and depth. People who are really into crypto tend to, they go down the rabbit hole and they learn about important concepts like self-custody and what private keys are and how to keep those safe. So there's certainly a cohort of people that go down that path well. But the average person that learns about crypto, they stay at a very superficial level, right? This is the person who like signed up with Coinbase or Robinhood and bought Dogecoin because Elon Musk talked about it. And they bought it because it was going up, and like that's really like the extent of their understanding.
And then they blame all of crypto as a whole when the price goes down, or they didn't make and they didn't become a billionaire overnight. Yeah.
Yeah, and they get pissed off when the price goes down, and so they go off and leave it. And it's just, I think that's a majority of people that get interested in this stuff. end up at that superficial level. So that's a worrying trend for their own sake, right? Because like they're not really getting the advantages of this technology if they remain at that level of understanding. So that's worrying. There's certainly a lot of worrying government trends, but maybe we'll get into some of those in the discussion. But yeah, I'd say that one.
Yeah, and I wonder on that point, just to hold for a bit, is whether the technology itself ends up being a reflection of how people want to engage in their own identity, their own sovereign self, engage in money. If you look at the way that there's probably a bell curve of how people interact with their own finances and their own sense of individuality that probably is tracked somewhat by the space itself. So it's kind of a broader trend in people's engagement in these kinds of topics.
Yeah, like someone who doesn't take their own nutrition seriously, for example, probably we wouldn't expect them to take their own finances seriously, because it requires some work and some education and trial and error and risk taking and like understanding of complex systems. And so I guess what I'm lamenting is really just that some people are superficial about really important aspects of their own lives, right? Like you don't need to go in depth on quantum mechanics if you're a normal person, but you should probably go in depth on how money works, because you spend your entire life working for money. It's like an everyday thing. You should probably go in depth on how nutrition works, because it's an everyday thing. So yeah, perhaps this is just a larger issue with people taking their own life more seriously. And hopefully crypto will help pull people toward greater individual responsibility, because now they can. And the upside of being knowledgeable in this stuff is huge. And the downside is really bad. You end up getting wrecked by FTX. So like there's a Darwinian process here, which is a little brutal to say, but the people that understand these things, I think, will do better over the long term than those who don't.
Absolutely. Well, on the positive side, what's the most exciting trend in crypto that you see?
Let's see. The most exciting trend is just like how cool DeFi is getting. Like, Bitcoin was this amazing mechanism for base money and has proven itself in that regard and is continuing to grow. But money is not in and of itself a financial system. It's like, the most important component of it, but it's not the whole thing. And before smart contracts, you couldn't really do much. Like most financial tooling, you had to continue to use TradFi. And the development of DeFi, these protocols that are immutable, permissionless, when done well, have all or most of the good attributes of Bitcoin. And now, I can get a loan backed by crypto, and I don't have to use a bank for a loan anymore at all. That's so cool. And anyone in the world can do that. So that tooling getting better and better, I think, is the best trend within the crypto world. And I think the one that'll get the most attention over the next several months is the Bitcoin ETF.
Yeah, lots coming up there, that's for sure. Well, I guess the final one, and obviously DeFi went through a major DeFi summer phase, as it was called, a couple of years ago. With all the, let's say, hope and promise of the space, as well as all of the activity that we see in the space, do you see it as moving too fast or too slow?
I don't know. I don't think I'm wise enough to comment on that kind of thing. I think it should move fast, and I prefer things to move fast and for mistakes to get made than to be overly conservative, because I understand the power of compounding. And so like the more you delay the progress of technology, it's not the difference next year in what would be available that matters. It's like 10 years from now, if you consider compounding, like whenever you slow the curve of development, you cause serious problems in the future in terms of what would have existed that now won't. So I'm of course like much more of the pioneering type that's like, you know what, let's move fast, let's break things. People are going to get wrecked sometimes. We can all learn and grow together. And like, that's a more interesting life, I'd say, than one in which there are guardrails everywhere and everyone's always conservative all the time. We live in like a very protected environment anyway, right? We're not out on the savannah with like wild animals chasing us. So I think we still need a little danger in our lives and a little risk, and that comes from frontier markets. And I think that's a healthy thing psychologically for people, but it does require a degree of, self-responsibility and development.
I just reread The Giver, and just like the society that they build is all about sameness, and the society is they really just wanted to take, they took away color, they took away animals, they took away any risk from people ever. And I think just reminds me that we governments or, regulators, they try so hard to protect us from ourselves. And I think we could do a lot more of that, like innovating, trial and error. Just let us try. Don't stop us before we've even had a chance to try. So it was a good book to read and kind of think of it, apply it to the crypto world.
Yeah, I haven't read that since I was a little kid. Maybe I should look at it again.
Yeah, but like 100 pages is really short, but it just reminds you that like they can try to make society safer and safer and safer and better and better and better, but then all of a sudden it's not a society anymore. It's not. It's all the same.
Yeah, risking a bit of wreckage. You risk losing on your crypto bag is probably better than having a lion jump on top of you. So come on, folks, get out there and have a confrontation with a virtual bear or of some sort.
Yeah, like a good practical example of this is like if you consider the concept of like security and finance, like how safe financial institutions are and the security methods used. What banks have used for a long time is pretty pathetic, right? Like if you're trying to access your account and you just need to, it asks you like
what's your first car
number is and your first car. Like
that's name.
These are things that any moderately sophisticated adversary could have figured out about you already. And that's the state of the art in TradFi, right? Or like when you, every time you get an email from a lawyer and it has this like huge boilerplate at the bottom of the email about how all of this is secure and private and it shouldn't be shared. Like all that is nonsense. No one reads that and it doesn't do anything for protection. You compare that, which is the highly regulated world that has these stupid guardrails and very little development in actual security and privacy, to what's happened in crypto, where you have this highly adversarial frontier environment, enemies everywhere, and you have strong cryptography. You have this like science of secret keeping. And you have privacy that cannot be broken by anyone, right? And like you don't need boilerplate text to do it. And I think that's just a good example of like when you let people be free to fail and to experiment, you end up getting much more robust technologies and protections than if you have this, coddling regulatory environment that tries to protect everyone with these soft little, nonsense things.
Well, I'll take us into we want to have a discussion both on a reflection of 2023 and looking ahead into 2024. You and I have gotten to experience a few of these cycles together. But, since you have been through it so many times, I want you to reflect, like, how does this compare? How does this last year compare? And what do you think we'll remember about this stage of crypto?
Yeah, I guess the most simple way to describe 2023 was like the cleanup of the FTX blowup and the prior blowups that happened in 2022, like Terra and Three Arrows Capital and all that. 2022 was like the worst year in crypto. It was absolutely brutal. And so 2023 was just like, I think it was a clearing out of all the fair weather crypto people. They all left and thought it was dead again. The industry had some reflection to do and like some work to do, and we're through that now. So I can't imagine like a better setup for 2024. We're probably at the peak of interest rates, and we're on the eve of the Bitcoin ETFs getting opened. And I would never say that all the bad actors have been washed out of the industry, because that's never going to be true, but many of them have, and many of the big ones. It's really good that the Binance settlement is behind us to some degree. I would say that was a fairly middle of the road outcome. It could have been a lot worse. I think everyone was worried that that whole business and operation would just get seized by the government and destroyed, and people's capital that was in that exchange would be locked up in the court for 10 years. Like, that would have been an absolute disaster. That didn't happen. So 2024, I think, is going to be fantastic. And then you look at the macro environment of fiat just continuing to decay over time. I'm glad that I'm on this side of the technology curve and not the fiat stuff.
Do you have any one lesson that you have learned this year? Is there anything new that's actually popped up and that you feel like you've learned?
Most of my learning this year has been like on AI stuff. Like, I'm really getting excited about that. The intersection between AI and crypto, I think, is really interesting. It's amazing that like the only money that AI can use is cryptocurrency. Right? Like, cryptocurrency can't use analog systems of money. An AI doesn't have a passport to go and sign up with a bank, but an AI can open up a crypto account immediately, right, with private keys. So that's, I think, really exciting, and the AI tools are just profoundly impressive. I think the world has not realized like how much will change when you can generate art, text, materials, code at near zero cost. This is going to be like a huge boon to productivity in the world, and people are not at all digesting how big of a deal that is. So my learning in 2023 has mostly been in that regard. Like, I certainly didn't need to learn the lesson that centralized exchanges can collapse. I was born in Mount Gox days, so that lesson has been well learned. But yeah, I think
the space just thought that you needed it just one more time.
Just one more
really. God, what are we like? It's like 50 examples of huge exchanges going bust. It sucks.
For sure. I mean, just lingering on the AI piece, it'd be great to dive in a little bit there. Because I sort of mirror your sentiment that it seems like, that even a sort of AI curious person is generally using it to, create GIFs faster and, building some interesting, pictures amongst friends and so forth. How that there's been, a number of talks on the intersection between blockchain and AI, and it seems to be kind of at the periphery of conferences and the space and the conversation in the digital asset world. What other pieces there have you been learning about, and do you see any interesting projects that are coming through or themes that are coming through that may start gathering some momentum throughout next year?
Yeah, so there's a very important theme which I think will ring easily to crypto folks. So AI is obviously really powerful, and the vast majority of how people access AI, let's just say, goes through OpenAI and ChatGPT to simplify a little bit. OpenAI is a centralized company. They're not open. Nothing that they're doing is open source. And every answer that you get back from them, they're like storing, right? And it's attached to your identity, and they're censoring every answer.
They're sanitizing it. You can't even make it joke anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're sanitizing it, they're censoring it, and some of the ways that they sculpt the answers are probably reasonable and good. Others are really bad, and there's a lot of stuff in the middle. Some of the stuff they are censoring, they know they're doing it intentionally, and some stuff not. But it's a very manicured situation where the users are being spied on completely, and because it's a centralized company, governments are and will pressure them completely. Like, people should assume that everything you send to ChatGPT is siphoned over to the federal government. If it's not being now, it will be, and it certainly can be, right? Like, if the government merely needs to ask for those records, and they will get them from OpenAI. And then what this means is, like, government can pressure those filters to be what they wish, right? Like, what is acceptable discourse among the public, that will be sculpted by OpenAI under the pressure of various governments. And to to me, this is very frightening. And the only antidote to it is decentralized open source AI, right? So instead of your messages going to a centralized company and a closed source model, they go to an open source network and an open source model that's not beholden to any government. That theme of, like closed centralized AI versus open permissionless non-surveilled AI, I think is a really big one. And that's where the crypto people can help the AI people.
Yeah.
And I think the AI people have not recognized that threat as much as they should. They're starting to, like after the executive order came out, and certainly after OpenAI almost blew up a couple weeks ago. I think people in the AI world are realizing some of these central points of failure and how catastrophic that can be. So that's a huge theme that I care a lot about.
Yeah, no, it's a big one for sure. I feel like it's it's the same adoption curve, but is happening faster and faster. We're just right at the beginning of it, so a lot more to come there. I'm sure. I feel like we could do a whole piece on that. So the tangent, I guess, being CEO at OpenAI and all of the quick changes that were made there. If we come back into the digital asset space, crypto space, with, you mentioned all of the movements that's been going on at Binance. You touched on this a little bit already, but why do you think it was such a clean sort of initial press to resolution phase at Binance? You mentioned that being very positive for the space, and in terms of price, there was really it was kind of a non-event almost. What do you think was generally going on there? Do you see sort of CZ or Binance or competitors as being being bad actors in the space, or it was really just a case, as you say, of move fast, break things, pull a big check, and set up some senior leaders of the company to crack it onto a new course. What's your sentiment of that whole quite underwhelming saga?
Yeah, great question. So I think Binance is one of the great success stories of the crypto industry. It's like the first exchange that ever got huge and became the dominant exchange for more than a year. Like every single market leader in exchange got big, maybe for a year, and then blew up spectacularly. Binance deserves huge credit for becoming the largest exchange in the world, and then not stealing anyone's money, and not having a huge hack happen, and maintaining that market lead based on the merit of the exchange for years. They remain the market leader. CZ and his team deserve huge credit for that. Like, what matters is building good products that keep people safe and help them get into the crypto world, and Binance absolutely did this. All the allegations against him are, things that the government thinks are bad. I don't generally agree with it. The government wants Binance to basically spy on all users and report everything to the government. I think that's highly unethical. So to the degree that CZ wasn't doing that as much as the government wants, I would call him a hero for that, not a villain. And ultimately, Binance is a centralized company, and so it's going to have to comply with the pressures that governments put on it, and that's what we saw happen. So I think every centralized exchange will end up looking more and more like a bank, sadly. Like they can resist for longer or shorter, but they will all fall into the compliance regimes of their respective countries. And the only real antidote to that stuff is decentralized protocols, DeFi, decentralized blockchains. So Binance is amazing. CZ, I think, is a hero in my mind. I'm sure he made some actual mistakes, and I'm sure he did some things that were stupid or bad, like all humans have. But it's been a great story, and I hope that he gets as light of a sentence as possible, because at least from what I see and what I know, he hasn't done anything unethical. That's a big deal.
And he's really, as much as we would like all, crypto products to be self-custodied, he's at least setting the standard for the custody products with having the SAFU fund and, him, even that was just the message that he clung to. At the end of the day, the SEC has come down with all this stuff, but what they have not said is that we never did anything with customer funds. Your customer funds have always been safe. And so I think that, he is setting that standard for the rest of the custodians. And I hope that they all, after FTX, after, the success of Binance, they all start to really take note of that and make that industry standard.
Yeah, well, just look at the comparison between CZ and Sam of FTX, right? Like, so the way it was cast is that CZ and Binance are like the radical Wild West crypto exchange that isn't complying with all the government regulations, right? They were like the bad guys as portrayed by media and government. FTX was the opposite, right? Here was this like wonderful, young, brilliant guy, this effective altruist who was building a compliant exchange, followed the rules, was buddy-buddy with regulators and politicians, was Joe Biden's second largest donor, on the cover of like all these, status quo magazines.
He was the hero.
He was the fucking crook.
Yeah.
Right. He was the good guy, right? And CZ was the bad guy, according to the common, traditional narrative of this stuff. And as it turns out, CZ actually built the honest business that didn't steal from people. And Sam and FTX built, the first or second or third largest financial fraud in all of human history.
Have you gone back and watched that debate with you guys and like thought of it in the context, like after the fact of like, he actually knew he had the giant hole at the time that he was saying all this stuff to you and saying like everything should be so regulated? Like, have you, I don't know, just that I watched a little bit of it back in preparation for this interview. And I'm just like, he is a psychopath. He knew he didn't have the money to back it up. And yet he's saying all these things.
Yeah. It is wild. Like I think it's one of those examples of like virtue signaling versus actual virtue. Sam was a corrupt criminal and fraudster, but signaled all this virtue and said things that you need to say in order for governments to like you, and did the things you need to do in order for governments to like you. And he won over all these people because they live
he gave them money
lives. He gave them money, and they don't understand what actual like authentic business looks like, right? They don't understand why crypto can like be a more solid foundation than a bank. They don't understand the fundamentals of cryptocurrency, and so they were, of course, fooled by this guy. And it's an amazing story, and hopefully people learn the right lessons there. Appeals to regulation are at best an insufficient indicator of one's honesty, and I think more often than not are actually used to cover over, moral and technical deficiencies.
Absolutely. Well, I think we should shake off 2022, shake off 2023, and start to look towards 2024. And I am curious, I think you're a pretty optimistic guy. You start to smell those moon fumes pretty early. Do you think that is warranted? The thing I also want you to touch on is just like, how do you stay steadfast in this space to kind of shake off those 2 years and then look towards that future and really believe that it is going to take off?
Yeah, I think like the main thing that keeps one even keeled in this very noisy industry is to understand what's important about it and how these things work. Like there was nothing in 2022 or 2023 that challenged the fundamental premises of decentralization and permissionless blockchains. It was all the centralization in various forms that caused problems. And so to me, like, even though there's a disaster going on, that year, it's actually more evidence of the reason why this stuff exists in the first place. So it was emblematic of like the virtue of cryptocurrency as an ethos generally. So that helps. And since that thesis hasn't changed, like my behavior shouldn't change, right? I shouldn't run away from a system which is only proving itself to be more sound. But I can understand why a lot of people that have only that superficial understanding would see like 2022 as evidence that the cryptocurrency industry is a mess and shouldn't be trusted, right? But you need a little bit more of a nuanced understanding to realize it was actually quite the opposite. So I think a lot of that bad stuff has been cleared away now. I think 2024 is going to be an awesome year for macro reasons and for fundamental reasons of cryptocurrency. But ultimately, people should just be like learning how to use this stuff carefully and safely, and the rest will follow naturally.
You mentioned the ETF, but are there any other reasons that you're thinking that the bull market is warranted in 2024?
Yeah, so interest rates have probably peaked. And I say that not because I believe inflation has peaked necessarily. It might come back, but because the federal government can't afford to issue bonds at these rates, right? So there's so much debt that the federal government is raising. The higher the interest rates, the more expensive that debt goes, and it's already in like unsustainable, dangerous land. And interest rates need to get back down so that there's at least plausible deniability here that these bonds can keep being issued and that the government can afford it. So I think as interest rates come down, obviously that just increases liquidity throughout the entire global economy. Bitcoin is a huge benefactor of that. So that's going to be a huge tailwind. We've been through, I've been through 4 of these cycles in Bitcoin. I have a sense and a feeling of how the speculative cycles work, and it's not really unique to Bitcoin, right? Like all of human history has had these speculative cycles that go through these mania phases and then these depression phases. Crypto happens in a fairly quick time frame, like every 3, 4, 5 years, and we're well past the lows now. So I think Bitcoin is continuing on its march to becoming like the foundational money of planet Earth. And that's what I had thought in 2011 that it maybe could be someday. And it's so much more likely now than it was in 2011. So,
what's the next all-time high?
Yeah.
Erik, we want numbers.
I'm always wrong. Yeah, I'll give you numbers and I'll be wrong. I think that the next cycle high ends up between 250K and 750K.
You heard it here first.
Which is a pretty wide range. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets to 1 million,
wow.
But I'm not making that prediction. And it'll crash hard after it hits whatever highs, right? So I don't think it'll end up above 1 million in the next full cycle at all. But I do think we go well into the 3 figures, and I say like with 90% likelihood that we hit 100K within 2024. I think that's a safe prediction. That's only like a little over a 2x from here. So that's nothing for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll have you back on at the end of next year and check some of your predictions.
Yeah. Well, I still have my laser eyes that I put on Twitter.
You'll never lose them. I think you got them permanently implanted, right?
I did. Everyone put these things on and was like, oh yeah, we'll do this until we get to 100K. And I was serious when I did it, and we didn't get to 100K. And so I've had my laser eyes for like 3 years now or something. And a bunch of the other laser eye people like removed it and they went back to their old avatars. And I was like, guys, come on. Like, do what you're going to say you do. So
this guy has diamond hands. He has laser eyes.
Diamond hands, laser eyes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like obviously Bitcoin will get to 100K. So.
Well, thank you for your predictions. I'm sure you get asked all the time. Sorry to hold you to numbers as well, but we'll be keeping close eye. What I wanted to bring us to a little bit was around how do you assess risk in the space? So you're obviously very involved across lots of different areas. DeFi, brings this opportunity for individuals to almost build up their own spread portfolio of different types of risks based on tolerance. And obviously, as you know, on the names side of things, we're looking to introduce insurance as an asset class as part of that mix of assets that investors can hold. If you think of some of the largest funds in the world, or reinsurance funds and pension funds and so forth, are very heavily engaged in this kind of risk. That's now being available to a whole new sort of sector, new demographic of investors. Are you largely on the Bitcoin, ETH, crypto asset hold and see side, or do you very much engage in these different kinds of asset classes? And if so, how do you assess your risk as an individual?
Yeah, I think I tend to feel that the best way to measure risk in crypto is like Lindy effect, meaning like how long has something actually been in the wild? Like if a new protocol comes around or a new app, they're like, oh, we have all these millions of audits. It's like, that's cool. That's better than not having millions of audits. But how long have you actually been in the wild? How long have you been able to be attacked by adversaries? If that's a long period of time, then I can have more trust in something. If it's brand new, then there shouldn't be much trust at all. So I'd say that's the main one. Certainly, I prefer to hold like the main assets like Bitcoin and ETH, and I venture into maybe like 5 or 10 other ones. I think people know I'm like very much into the Thorchain project, and again, that's that DEX has been around for 3+ years at this point, so that helps. Ultimately, like when things are open source, knowledge about how they work can be learned, and people can get a really robust sense of like if something is secure with time, if it's open like that. Compare that to like a traditional closed source exchange, and you can never really know what's going on there. So I always prefer something that's open source, and that's very much like part of the ethos of crypto.
Yeah, and we're now a decent amount of years into all of this. So there's lots of projects coming through that actually have been around for a long time, have gone through these different cycles, are still standing, are still growing. So yeah, that sort of assessment becomes a little easier. You've had some crazy crashes that have done a lot of the sifting out for you as the different investors that are out in the space. So
well, so often we get asked, what chain is going to win or what coin is going to win. Can you talk about what you see for 2024 and beyond in terms of how one coin or one chain doesn't actually have to win, how there's going to be kind of a layer on top of everything that, you mentioned Thorchain, but like touch on Thorchain and anything else that actually is going to create this second network on top of all the other chains that we can interact with?
Yeah, so I think that the majority of assets in the world will become digital and like natively digital assets on top of blockchains in the future. And I doubt it's just one chain. The reason for that is because blockchains are specifically engineered machines. Like they have to make design trade-offs, and they have to design for certain features and not for others. And if you make it good in one way, you're probably making it bad in another way. And so I think there will be, I don't think there will be 1 million blockchains, but there will be more than one. And maybe that's 2 or 5 or 20. But people will find usage in different blockchains. And then on top of that, you'll have, thousands and thousands of different applications and assets within those applications. The number of those is kind of limitless. So yeah, I see, you have to figure out like which things compete directly with each other. Like a lot of people, I think, wrongly see Bitcoin and ETH as competing directly with each other. At this point, they're fairly different machines, right? Especially post change to proof of stake. ETH is a very different machine than Bitcoin is. And a lot of Bitcoin's strengths are Ethereum's weaknesses and vice versa. So I see these as very good complements. And if someone's like, well, what's going to win, Bitcoin or ETH? It's like, well, empirically, they've both been winning together. And they serve different markets. They're designed differently. They have different use cases, and they have different strengths and weaknesses. So I think often they're complements. There are assets which are going to be like perfectly competitive with each other, and probably just one of them wins over another. So like maybe a good example of this is like Bitcoin Cash versus Litecoin, right? Like these are, let's call them dumb money, like Bitcoin, in that they're basically just trying to be an asset, proof of work asset. And, both Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin are faster and cheaper to use than Bitcoin, right? So like they're both going to compete for that like faster proof of work blockchain component. Neither of them have smart contracts. I doubt there's a world in which both Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin exist for the long term. It could be years before it becomes clear which of those, if either, are used for that kind of thing. But those, I would say, are like perfectly competitive, and one will eat the other, or both will die.
And so, with Thorchain being able to trade one asset to another natively, on each of those chains, what's the natural next progression? So you've got the decentralized exchange, but what other DeFi tools come to that interoperability between chains?
Certainly, there isn't much interoperability between chains at all today, and even Thorchain does not provide interoperability between chains. I think that's kind of the wrong way to phrase it. Thorchain allows someone to trade one asset on one chain for a different asset on a different chain, but the chains never know about each other. They don't talk to each other. An action that happens on one chain is not affecting another chain. Interoperability, or like messaging between chains, would be a huge holy grail for the industry. There are certainly projects working on it, like Layer 0. And the whole Cosmos ecosystem is designed as a way to like build chains that can easily communicate with each other. So people are working on it, and I hope that happens, because that would be super cool if blockchains in general can talk to each other. Right now, they're all kind of islands. And if they can talk to each other, they all become more powerful, because one chain can utilize the benefits of another chain, and users end up getting the benefits of all these different chains behind the scenes. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard technical problem, and I'm hopeful it gets resolved, over the coming few years, but it's not going to happen next year.
Yeah. Oh, I'm always like very excited. I feel like when you first get into crypto, you feel like it's just right around the corner, and then you really have to get a little bit more mature in age to be like, okay, yes, like it will come, but it's just not going to be this year.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who was the person that said this famously, but that like people tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short term and underestimate the effect in the long term. Right. So certainly like in 2011, when we were talking about Bitcoin on the forums, there were people that were like, yeah, in 3 years, this is going to be the way that people do payments online. And here we are 13 years later, and people don't really use Bitcoin much for online payments. And yet Bitcoin has become, like $1 trillion asset class, and is already affecting like how entire countries work and how monetary systems work. So I think you just have to be patient, right? Like if something is sound, it will take time for it to change the behaviors of people in the real world, and we should give it the time to do that.
Yeah, I feel like the psychology of that is that these things happen subtly as well. So there's never a moment where everyone goes, right, and we arrived, and we get together and have a celebration. The things that you mentioned that have actually happened are completely celebration worthy, and but it's a subtle thing, isn't it? It's a day to day, it goes on into years, and we definitely kind of have arrived to a certain degree. But the other psychology is that we're forward thinking. So you're always looking to, what's next in a way. Where are the problems? Where do they remain? There will always be them to some degree. You mentioned earlier, we've got AI to contend with and work with, and figure out how that whole collaboration is going to go. The level of complexity will never reach a plateau of, here we are. So it's definitely kind of taking stock of what the space is achieving. That's what I always loved about the space, is that it did feel like, you still have that competitive tension that allows people to be productive and efficient, and, for bad projects to get wiped out. But there is an entire entity that is the whole space that is moving forwards in a good direction. And I was always baffled by the fact that there doesn't seem to be a good consensus as to where we should be going as civilization. And this space tended to have a slightly more coherent consensus on what that end goal should be. Obviously, people get distracted, and there are side things that come in and challenges that come in that push people off course. But that's what's exciting, is that there is a whole space moving in a certain direction. It's just how well can we define that direction?
I'd say like part of its magic is that like it doesn't necessarily have one direction. Mm-hmm. It's like this stuff is different things to different people. Someone who's into the diehard monetary economics of Bitcoin is not the same person who's into NFTs, right? And that's okay. Like there's a lot of people that use NFTs that have never touched Bitcoin, and yet they're using the technology that was inspired by it. And for those of us in the crypto industry, we see these things as so related, but it's become a diverse industry for sure. And I think that's ultimately good.
Mm.
Well, in this diverse industry, we have our heroes that are sometimes made out to be villains, as we talked about earlier in the episode here. And I wanted to share, I took a quote from your permissionless keynote. I want to also link that in the show notes. That's incredible. One of my favorite talks that I've ever heard you give, and I've sat through a few of them. So you said, Uniswap's enforcement division is never under-resourced, and the rules by which it operates are objective and transparent. We don't have to suffer subjective rules in the realm of finance any longer, but instead of Uniswap winning the Nobel Prize for the development of orderly markets, they are persecuted by the very agency tasked with ensuring orderly markets. You want to call us agents of chaos? You want to dismiss us as destructive anarchists? We're the only ones building financial rules that are enforced 100% of the time. I was like, okay, mic drop. That's hot. That's amazing. It's one of the best things you've ever said. Do you think that we will get there? Do you think that Nobel Prizes are on the horizon for crypto leaders? Do you think Vitalik will get, that credit that he deserves? CZ gets that credit that he deserves. Do you think that we will see that in the future?
I absolutely think that the innovations and innovators will get their recognition in the future. But we don't need it. Like no one in crypto needs the Nobel Prize. We don't need credentialism because we have actually authentic systems built on provable cryptography, right? So like there's a degree to which the credentialism doesn't matter at all. Like we built something better than credentials, which is very cool. We don't need to rely on the reputation of individuals or the awards that they've received because we have open source code that can't be falsified. But I do hate that we get persecuted for this. It's not surprising, right? Like whenever there's like a serious change in society away from the status quo, there is a large entrenched interest that sees that as an attack on the system. And in some ways it is an attack on the system, right? It's a fundamental change in how human beings operate, but it's a good change. And while it won't lead to a panacea, and while it will cause new problems, it is unequivocally like better than the old way of doing things. And that will be so obvious to, like our children's generation. They're going to laugh very frequently at the way that people, even in the year 2020 or 2025, handled money, like using checks and signatures where you scribble your name on a piece of paper to prove something. It's going to be so silly, right? Like so silly. It's going to be so silly that in like 2023, when you send a wire transfer to someone in another country, it can take like 5 days, right? And it's been that way since I got involved in Bitcoin. Like I often joked back in 2011 and 2012 that it's faster to send an anvil strapped with cash to Japan. Like you could FedEx the anvil covered in cash to Japan faster than you could actually wire digital money over to Japan. And it's true today, right? So these systems are so stupid, and I think that'll be apparent to people in the future. yeah, Uniswap should absolutely win the Nobel Prize for orderly markets. But what's happening instead is like SEC going after people creating tokens and innovating.
And I guess you're right. I don't necessarily need the awards, or we don't need the awards, but yeah, could you stop subpoenaing us? Could you stop arresting us? Could you stop putting our people in jail? Like, please.
Yeah, we don't need your awards. Just get the F out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Like, that would be great.
Final point on that. What would you think is the most valid opposition that you do get to that sentiment? So, like, you debate lots of people. The whole space is trying to educate the rest of financial systems as to what they're doing here. Do you must come across lots of sort of counters to that sentiment of get out of the way. Do you think that there are any valid opposing points that the space should be considering?
I think there's a lot of valid sentiment. For example, like the idea that we don't want terrorists to be funded is very valid sentiment. Like, I don't want terrorists to have money or to be able to carry out their atrocious acts any more than anyone at the Treasury or the FBI or anything. So we align on the sentiment, right? But the problem is that the world has gotten used to the system of deputization, where law enforcement, being so incapable of actually enforcing these laws, has coerced private actors through their systems to do the job of the law enforcement for them. And this is a problem, and it's inappropriate, right? Like a business owner shouldn't be deputized by the police to do the surveillance and the police work of the police. Right?
With your private business money, with your resources, with your time and your energy. Yeah.
Exactly. Or if he is, he should be getting paid.
Yeah.
Like if the Treasury Department wants financial institutions to do their work for them, maybe they should pay the financial institutions. But that's not how it works. The financial institutions have to do all sorts of work, incur all sorts of costs to make the law enforcement's job easier for them. I just think that's not a very good way to build society. And, I think the presumption of innocence is a really important framework for good civilization. And when you ask anyone, in government, like, should you have a presumption of innocence? Everyone will say yes, right? Like, everyone agrees with that. It's a good principle. But all this policy works on the opposite, right? Like KYC works on the opposite, where you're actually endangering people, taking their information, storing it, siphoning it off to the government, when there's not even an accusation of a crime in the first place, let alone a specific belief that a specific person did something wrong. So it's like it's a presumption of guilt. And you have this presumption of guilt throughout the entire financial system, and the friction that adds to the 99 out of 100 people that are innocent and good is, I think, unethical, just in order to make the law enforcement's job of catching that one person easier. So we can agree on some of these principles and themes. No one wants terrorists to be funded, but let's enable society to be built in a more thoughtful way. Crypto people are doing that without permission, and I am very glad that they are.
Oh, well said. We look at it's that technical enforceability of these big, heavily bureaucratic industries as well, and it's like we have a scientific method that the vast majority of the world subscribes to. This space seems to be deploying that. Final question, Erik, before we wrap up here. This podcast, as you know, is called The Missing Link. We try to explore what possible gaps remain to bring on this next wave of mass adoption. Feels potentially like the next one is around the corner. You touched on a few potentials, I feel, throughout the talk. What would you see is the missing link to this next wave?
I think a missing link is that the vast majority of human society doesn't understand the harm and danger and loss that is occurring through monetary debasement. They're not aware of this, and so they don't realize that there's better ways of building money. And for for people to start opting into cryptocurrencies as base money, there's kind of this prerequisite that you think deeply about what money means and realize that there's a fundamental problem with, it's not a problem with the dollar or the euro or the yen. It's a problem with fiat currency in general. Every fiat currency suffers this problem. It's like it's a design issue. The design issue is that a certain group of people can just print it forever at the cost of everyone using it.
Do you think we can get that though without total financial collapse?
Probably not.
Because I'm sure the countries that have had, 100, 200% inflation year over year, like, yes, they're going to get it. But
even they don't get it that much. Like Argentina, for example, right? Like they're the example that everyone uses as the place where hyperinflation keeps happening, right? It's like 4 times in the last 2 or 3 generations. If there's ever a people that should understand this stuff, it's them. And yet they keep imbuing central banks and politicians with the ability to print money. This recent election of Javier Milei is maybe, an indication that eventually people learn that maybe no central cabal of people should be granted the power to just print money. So I was very glad to see that election. But yeah, I don't know if most people will ever learn that lesson without a huge financial apocalypse that visits them and their family. And that's awful, right? Like I don't want to wish for everyone to suffer through horrible economic tragedy just so that they learn about Bitcoin. I'd rather they just heard one of my podcasts.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
There we go. I'm going to wrap this podcast and give it to all my family and friends for their Christmas gifts. That's how we'll learn.
Good. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of easy ways to learn about Bitcoin and why it's important. And then there's a really difficult and hard way. And unfortunately, old habits die hard. And I think a lot of people are just going to have to go through a bunch of suffering before they realize that the money that they cling to and that they worship and that they work for is itself corrupt and sick and needs to be done away with. And hopefully the crypto industry is building tools to make the rescue of those people as quick and efficient as possible. Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap for today. Thank you so much for being on The Missing Link. It's so good to see you. Yeah, great to see you, Danielle. Thank you both for having me on. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
We're one step closer to finding the missing link. If you enjoy our show, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcast. And be sure to come back next month. Until then, we are The Missing Link.